3 stages a man goes through after losing a mature woman, Carl Jung. You will think about this long after she's gone. If a man ever loses a woman who has reached the fullness of her maturity, not in years, but in soul, he is not merely losing a partner. He is losing a mirror that once reflected his potential, his shadow, his softness, and the quiet depth of his own soul. And though he might not understand it at first, her absence will begin the most silent war he has ever fought, a war between his ego and his awakening. At first, he won't even recognize it as loss. He will call it freedom. He will call it space. He will tell himself he needs to breathe again, that the weight she carried in her presence was too much, too demanding, too wise, too unyielding. Because a mature woman does not ask to be loved the way others do. She asks to be met, in awareness, in responsibility, in truth. She does not chase, she mirrors. And in that mirror, a man often sees what he has long tried to avoid. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And so it begins, the first stage. The unconscious starts to speak in whispers he doesn't want to hear. He distracts himself, seeking noise to drown the silence she left behind. He goes out, he flirts, he fills his days with movement, but at night, when the noise fades, he meets the shadow of himself. It comes in the shape of her, the way she looked at him not with need, but with knowledge. The way her silence used to reveal his weakness more than her words ever could. He starts to remember that she never tried to fix him, she only held a mirror to what he refused to face. And that mirror, oh, that mirror, becomes unbearable. Because deep inside, he knows she didn't leave him for another man. She left a version of him that refused to grow. She left the boy who wanted comfort over truth, control over connection. He will call her cold, but in truth, she was simply complete. This is where denial gives way to projection. The man begins to rewrite the story in his mind, making her the villain. He will say she was too strong, too distant, too complex, not realizing that what he calls complexity is simply emotional maturity. She became too real for his illusions. She saw through the masks that once protected him, the ones built from pride and unhealed wounds. She became the mirror he could no longer stand to look into. And so, he avoids reflection. Yet, the psyche is relentless. What he avoids in waking life, the unconscious will bring through dreams, through faces of other women who resemble her in fragments, a smile here, a tone there. He will find pieces of her everywhere, not because she is haunting him, but because she awakened something he can no longer bury. That is the cruel and divine irony. The more he runs, the more her energy follows him. She was not just a woman, she was an archetype, the embodiment of the anima, the feminine within him, calling him toward wholeness. Losing her means losing touch with that part of his soul that knew how to feel, to soften, to love without armor. And so, he tries to find her again, not realizing that what he truly seeks is his own lost self. There is a moment, usually in solitude, when the illusion finally breaks. He looks around at everything he has built to distract himself and feels nothing. The laughter is empty, the faces around him blur, and suddenly, he feels the full weight of her absence, not as longing, but as confrontation. For the first time, he begins to understand, it wasn't her maturity that was too much. It was his own immaturity that couldn't meet it. And this realization cracks something open inside him. Beneath the layers of pride and fear, there lies grief, not just for her, but for the man he could have been while she was still there. This is where the ego starts to die, and the real work begins, shadow work, humility, and the birth of awareness. Because losing a mature woman is not punishment. It is initiation, into consciousness, into self-confrontation, into the slow unraveling of who he pretended to be. It is the first descent into the underworld of his own psyche, where he must meet the ghosts of his own making. Every word she once said now echoes with new meaning. Every silence she held becomes a lesson. Every moment he dismissed as too deep becomes the very wisdom he now craves. That's the paradox of loss. You only begin to understand its sacredness when you no longer have the one who carried it. He enters the second stage quietly, almost unknowingly, the descent. The world outside still looks the same, yet everything inside him has shifted. What once gave him pleasure now feels hollow. The chase that once thrilled him now feels meaningless. The laughter he used to perform so easily dies on his lips before it reaches his chest. This is the beginning of what Jung called the negrito, the blackening, the stage of psychological death before rebirth. He does not yet know it, but he is beginning to confront the shadow, that dark counterpart of himself he spent years denying. The shadow is not evil. It is merely the truth he avoided. It is the anger, the insecurity, the fear of being unworthy, the deep craving for control that once disguised itself as strength. And now, without her presence to mirror his light, he meets his darkness face to face. At first, he fights it. He blames her, then fate, then God. Anything but himself. Because to admit that he was the author of his own downfall feels unbearable. To admit that she left because she saw through his defenses means acknowledging that those defenses were never real protection, only walls built around a frightened boy. So he oscillates between anger and longing. One day, he curses her name, the next, he prays for her return. But the truth is, she no longer exists in the form he remembers. The mature woman he lost has continued evolving, while he remains at the crossroads of his own undoing. He cannot return to her because he has not yet met himself. The descent strips him bare. Friends stop understanding him, casual connections feel meaningless. The world he once knew starts to dissolve, not in flames, but in quiet disinterest. He begins to crave silence, though it terrifies him. He sits in empty rooms and hears echoes of her words, not the sweet ones, but the honest ones. "You don't see yourself," she once said. At the time, he dismissed it. Now, it rings like prophecy. It's here that the second stage takes root, confrontation. He begins to question everything, his choices, his values, his patterns. He sees how often he sought validation through conquest, how many times he mistook control for power and silence for peace. He realizes that what she represented was never dominance, it was presence. Her maturity wasn't about knowing more, it was about feeling more deeply, being unafraid of truth. He remembers the way she could sit in silence without needing to fill it. The way she would look into his eyes as if searching for something buried behind them. And he wonders if she knew all along, that he wasn't ready, that he was still running. He begins to see her not as a loss, but as a teacher disguised as love. And this recognition burns. Because once a man realizes that his pain is his teacher, he can never return to ignorance. This is where many retreat, they numb themselves, distract, move on to new faces that demand less truth. But a few, the ones who endure, begin the sacred work of integration. They start to walk through the fire instead of around it. He starts reading things he once mocked. Jung, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius. Words that once seemed abstract now feel written for him. He learns that to master one's mind is not to suppress emotion but to understand it. He discovers that strength is not the absence of vulnerability but the courage to sit with it. Still, the transformation is not gentle. Nights are long. Memories replay like mirrors that will not shatter. There are moments when he hates her for awakening him, for showing him what love could be, because now he cannot accept anything less. And yet, in that hatred, he begins to see the truth, it was never about her. It was always about the parts of himself he refused to love. The descent is slow, and it is sacred. Like the myth of Orpheus descending into the underworld, he must travel through his own depths without losing faith in the possibility of return. The shadow becomes his companion, whispering, accusing, sometimes guiding. He begins to notice that the pain no longer destroys him as it once did. Instead, it begins to teach him. Each realization is a wound that opens and closes with wisdom. He starts to remember moments from their time together not as nostalgia but as symbols, her laughter, her patience, her withdrawal, all metaphors of the psyche itself, showing him what he lacked. And slowly, what once felt like punishment begins to look like purification. The loss becomes alchemy. He realizes something profound, she did not abandon him. She completed her role in his evolution. Her absence is not rejection, it is initiation. The man who survives this descent will never again seek shallow validation. He will no longer crave being admired, he will crave being understood. And though he doesn't yet know it, this surrender marks the beginning of the third stage, the rising. The rising begins not with triumph, but with stillness. After the storms of denial, projection, and grief, there comes a silence so vast it almost feels divine. It's the quiet after the soul has burned through its illusions. The man who once ran from pain now sits beside it, not as an enemy but as a companion. He begins to see that suffering was never sent to punish him, but to awaken him. In this stillness, something extraordinary happens. His perception begins to shift. He starts to sense the subtle difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the ache of absence, solitude is the fullness of presence. And for the first time, he begins to feel whole in his own company. This is the dawn of individuation, the process Jung spoke of as the integration of the self, where one stops seeking completion in another and instead turns inward to meet what was missing all along. He realizes that every woman he loved before, including the mature woman he lost, was a reflection of his own inner feminine, his anima, the part of him capable of empathy, intuition, and connection to the soul. He projected her onto the women he loved, mistaking them for the source of his completeness. But the truth was deeper. She was never the missing piece. She was the mirror showing him that the missing piece lived within him. This understanding changes everything. He no longer feels the urge to chase or prove. The energy that once fueled his ego now begins to turn inward, transforming into awareness. He starts noticing the small details of life, the scent of morning air, the sound of rain, the way light falls across his room. These moments no longer pass unnoticed, they root him in the present, where peace quietly resides. And yet, this peace is not the absence of pain. It's the acceptance of it. He learns that maturity isn't about escaping the shadow but embracing it, allowing both the light and the dark to coexist. He understands what she meant when she said, real love begins when the illusion ends. Because love, in its truest form, is not about possession, it's about recognition. He begins to forgive her, not in a single moment, but gradually, through understanding. He sees now that she couldn't stay because his world was too small for her truth. She wasn't punishing him, she was honoring herself. Her leaving forced him into a transformation that comfort never could. And in this realization, resentment dissolves. The heart that once felt broken now begins to open again, not in desperation, but in reverence. He no longer needs love to fill a void, he desires it as an exchange between equals. His love now has weight, not the heaviness of attachment, but the groundedness of understanding. This is where the third stage deepens. He starts to embody what he once sought. The qualities he admired in her, wisdom, patience, depth, begin to bloom within him. He no longer sees maturity as a burden but as liberation. The man who once feared being seen now longs for authenticity. The man who once measured his worth by validation now measures it by inner peace. He begins to attract differently, not from ego, but from alignment. He no longer seeks the thrill of being chosen, he seeks the calm of mutual recognition. The next woman who enters his life will not arrive to complete him, but to accompany him. And when he looks into her eyes, he will not project his wounds, he will see a reflection of his healed self. Sometimes, he still thinks of the woman who awakened this journey, the mature woman who left. But his memories no longer sting, they bless. He realizes she was the sacred catalyst, the storm that broke his ego and set his soul free. Every tear, every sleepless night, every echo of her name was a thread pulling him toward awakening. He finally understands what Jung meant when he said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Losing her forced him to meet himself. And in meeting himself, he found what he was searching for all along, inner wholeness. Now, when he walks, there's a calm strength in his steps. When he speaks, his words carry depth. When he loves, it is without fear. He no longer seeks to possess, he seeks to understand. The man who once resisted pain now carries it as wisdom. The woman who left is no longer a wound, she is a chapter, sacred and complete. And perhaps, somewhere in the vast architecture of fate, she feels it too, not as longing, but as peace. Because a man who has gone through the fire and returned no longer clings. He respects the impermanence of things, yet cherishes their meaning. He learns to love without demand, to give without losing himself. This is the true rising, not into pride, but into presence. The boy has died, the man has awakened. And though the world remains the same, he now walks through it differently, softer, deeper, freer. But there is one final truth he must still face, the understanding that love, in its purest form, is not about holding on. It is about letting go with grace. There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the rising turns into awakening. The man no longer seeks closure from her, or from life itself. He has outgrown the need for explanations. The pain that once defined him has transformed into wisdom. The ache that once consumed him has become clarity. This is not the end of grief, it is the beginning of freedom. He begins to see the architecture of everything that happened, how her leaving was not chaos, but divine choreography. How the universe uses loss as a sculptor uses a chisel to carve away what is false until the true form of the soul is revealed. He starts to notice the sacred geometry hidden in suffering. That nothing was random. That even heartbreak has purpose when seen through the eyes of awareness. He recalls her presence, not her face, not her voice, but her energy. The steadiness she carried, the calm that came from knowing herself. He understands now that her strength wasn't defiance, it was serenity born from self-mastery. And it dawns on him, she was not teaching him how to love her, she was teaching him how to love himself. Every mature woman is a mirror of the divine feminine, the embodiment of the soul's wisdom, compassion, and truth. When a man loses her, he is invited to rise into his divine masculine, not dominance, but consciousness. The union between the two is not just romantic, it is alchemical. It is the merging of opposites, the sacred dance between the heart and the mind, the soul and the ego. But to experience this union, he must first face his own fragmentation. That is the hidden lesson of loss, individuation through love. Jung described it as the soul's pilgrimage toward wholeness, where every heartbreak is both a death and a rebirth. And this man, who once resisted pain, now bows to it. He learns that surrender is not weakness, it is the ultimate act of strength. He learns that forgiveness is not forgetting, it is freedom from attachment. Now, he carries himself differently. His silence no longer feels heavy, it feels alive. His eyes, once restless, now hold depth. He moves through the world with the quiet dignity of someone who has faced his own abyss and returned bearing light. He no longer fears losing, he fears only living without awareness. And somewhere in his soul, gratitude blooms, not for what he received, but for what he learned. He thanks her in the language of the heart, the one that needs no words. Thank you for leaving when I still refuse to see. Thank you for being the storm that broke the illusion. Thank you for showing me that love without growth is not love, it is dependency. He realizes now that a mature woman never truly leaves, she becomes part of the man she awakened. Her influence lives in his integrity, in the tenderness that returns to his touch, in the way he listens without needing to respond. Every woman he meets from now on will encounter her legacy, not as competition, but as the quiet strength within him that she helped shape. He no longer measures time by how long it has been since she left, but by how much he has grown since she did. He no longer searches for her reflection in others because he has integrated her light within his own. This is what Jung called the union of opposites, the balancing of the masculine and feminine within the psyche. It is the sacred equilibrium that births wisdom. In this balance, he finds peace. The endless chase ends. The noise fades. The longing transforms into gratitude. He begins to live not for validation, but for truth. His life becomes simpler, yet infinitely deeper. Every action arises from awareness, not from fear. Every connection is born from authenticity, not from need. And one day, without even realizing it, he meets another woman. She does not ignite chaos in him, she ignites calm. She does not awaken his wounds, she harmonizes with his peace. He does not lose himself in her, he meets her as an equal. There is no chase, no confusion, no drama, just presence. The kind of connection that grows quietly, rooted in self-respect. This is when he finally understands the sacred paradox. To truly love a woman, he had to first lose one who taught him how. He smiles when he thinks of her now, not from longing, but from reverence. She will forever remain the threshold between the man he was and the man he became. Her memory is not a wound anymore, it is a compass pointing toward truth. And so, he moves forward, not carrying her, but carrying what she awakened. Because the man who has lost a mature woman and survived the transformation does not return to who he was. He becomes a vessel of awareness, a keeper of peace, a man no longer defined by what he holds, but by what he understands. And if fate ever brings her across his path again, he will not try to reclaim her. He will simply bow, not in regret, but in gratitude, knowing that love, in its highest form, is not possession. It is liberation. The woman who once loved him has already fulfilled her purpose. She didn't come to stay, she came to awaken. And as the final veil of attachment falls, he whispers into the silence, not as confession, but as realization. The woman who leaves you after loving you deeply does not abandon you. She returns you to yourself. The journey is complete. The shadow has been faced, the ego softened, the soul awakened. The mature woman moves forward, too calm, radiant, untouched by bitterness. She no longer seeks validation from any man, for she has become her own source of peace. The circle is closed. The awakening is mutual. The man understands at last. The woman who knows her worth does not chase, she chooses.